I'd like to look around in the past. They've got some wonderful exhibits here, so follow me and we'll take a little quick tour through the museum. Gosh, look at this big buffalo up here. This buffalo is part of our heritage and history here in El Reno. And the buffalo roamed the whole range in the prairie. This one was out on Route 66. He was for tourists to look at and take their pictures. Well, he got tired of people taking his picture and he started ramming the fence. Well, one day he rammed the fence and hit a VW Volkswagen and tore it up pretty bad, and they couldn't get him back in. So they had to put the poor buffalo down. So we hated to see him go to waste, so the museum raised some money and had him mounted. And so he's right here in permanent history. Wonderful place for him with our wonderful Indian arts exhibit. And so everyone can see exactly how big. This particular buffalo weighed 1 ton. Pretty amazing. Got some great Indian artifacts here. Wonderful exhibits. Just wonderful headdresses here. All eagle feathers. Pretty amazing. They've got some great exhibits here on all these other pottery and wonderful Indian artifacts. Of course, the early Indians and the Cheyenne Arapaho from around here that were out at Fort Reno. All on both sides here, great Indian artifacts. There's a wonderful exhibit here at Fort Reno. There's General Sheridan's actual Civil War sword is right here. It's a great exhibit because we have so many artifacts from Fort Reno here, down to the old mess silverware and the silverware here and all this and the branding irons. The early day cowboy at Fort Reno, great shots of the early day cowboy, and of course all the wonderful history of all the wonderful horses that they raised out there. One of the most famous horses that was raised at Fort Reno and trained there was Blackjack. If you've ever noticed the riderless horse with the boots turned backwards, he was the horse that escorted President Kennedy's funeral. And he was trained right here, of course, at Fort Reno. And that's the picture of Blackjack. We've also got some wonderful military boots in here and the actual clothing that they would have worn out at the fort. And of course, at the fort, there was also a famous scout called Ben Clark. Saved all the Indian men and children, women and children, men, women and children at the Battle of Washita. That's all told in here. This history of Ben Clark, that famous scout. We've also got the wonderful history here of the German prisoner of war camp that was here. And at the fort, the German prisoners that died here are buried out there. And there's a complete segregated section there for those prisoners of war. Those prisoners of war were very lucky at that particular time because a lot of them would work on local farms here. And they loved this area, and a lot of the descendants and people came back here after the war and continued to farm and made wonderful friendships here. So that's why there's a lot of German people here too, also because of the Mennonites that were also here. This is a wonderful area here too. We've got some peace medals from the Native Americans and things. There's a Cheyenne chief here that's got some peace medals that came with him. And as you travel right forward here, what's wonderful is I think I'm going to take a little seat here and sit down on the original benches where you sat and waited for the train to come. Really comfortable. A lot of times the kids would jump over from the handles to handles, which was a little dangerous, but that's kind of the way it was. Now, over in this section, this is very interesting to our Connecticut County. It's the run of '89 and the run of '92 and the drawing of 1901. Of course, right here on the grounds that you're standing is where those land runs took place. They were the boundaries. One boundary was to the front side, the other boundary was to the back side. And the small cannon out at Fort Reno sounded off and people ran with all their might. We had one little lady, though, that just kind of stood on the front line. She saw everybody run as fast as they could run, and she just walked a few steps, took her stake, and hammered it right there. So she was pretty smart in my book. She didn't have to go too far. People got killed, they were trampled, they were hurt, they were maimed. Running for all this, there were murders and everything going on. So they decided to do a land drawing in 1901 to stop that. There were over 160,000 people that came to El Reno. That was a town of a mere 3,000. They were here for 6 days in July, and they drew numbers out of a hat, and that's how they did the land drawing. After those 6 days, 150,000 people that lived in tents and in wagons and all this disarray left all this trash behind. And so El Reno had the huge task of 3,000 people cleaning up all that mess that all those people left behind. It was quite the sight. We've got wonderful photos of that showing how many people were actually here, how the streets were crowded. For 6 blocks, you couldn't even walk. There were so many people that came to us at that particular time. As you turn into here, after, of course, everyone made the land run and the land drawings, and they had all these wonderful things that they brought with them, one of the neatest things that we've got here that was an early timepiece was a music box. And I'm going to play you some songs on that music box so you can get the full gist of just how that early sound was. Early day music. You crank it up. Flip a little switch. Place the needle right on the record. Open it up for the sound. And there you have it. Man, that's pretty unique. A little louder. A little quieter. Pretty neat, isn't it? And they had a complete library underneath of all their records, so right at their fingertips, so they could play their favorite record at any time. Ingenious. Okay. I see you've just made a tour back in time in the old drugstore. Pretty amazing, isn't it? I'd like to be sitting in one of those ice cream chairs having an ice cream soda about right now, wouldn't you? Think I would. Wonderful Victrola again, and look at all the medicines here in the old drugstore. The old jeweler's clock there, and of course the old wonderful back bar with all these soda glasses and all the favorite sarsaparilla that you could want right there, all for your might like to check into an old sarsaparilla. Do you know what an old sarsaparilla is? Read up on it. You'll find it really enjoyable. I see you've arrived at the wonderful women's early day period clothing. Look at those purses. They're amazing. All the intricate beadwork, the little tiny chains, the little wonderful scarves, and those button-up shoes are totally a pain. I have to have a lot of help with putting those on. And if you notice, I don't have a corset on today. One of the most unique items in the showcase here with the women's goods are the wonderful hobbies that they did. The hair wreath. It's a work of art. They would take the hair of their family members. They would wash it, boil it, put it on these little bobbins, and get it to form to a shape, let it dry, and they would work that hair and with bobbins and threading and these little tools and make these beautiful hair wreaths that would tell the history and the story of their family. And it was a complete work of art. And to this day, people are amazed at the wonderful, intricate work of the hair wreath. And a business suit. What a wonderful business suit. A gentleman might have worn this, and of course this wonderful top hat would have made him look like the perfect gentleman back during that time period, with, of course, wonderful pair of wingtips. Your total would have been $2.75. You must have bought a lot of goodies today. Penny candy, all kinds of stuff. Maybe you had to buy a sack of flour for mom or a few apples for dad. A lot of good things you could have bought for $2.75. We have some wonderful souvenirs here from the early day businesses. Those wonderful souvenir plates that they would give out. Of course, those beautiful old calendars that they would frame, and they were a work of art that everyone would collect. Of course, all business section is really interesting. You can take the time to look through all the old pictures. Of course, most people would ride their horse to the downtown businesses back then, or take the buggy, whatever they would prefer. Take their stuff to the Crystal Laundry where they might have their laundry done, some of them maybe once a month. Kind of a piece of cake, 1905. My, wouldn't we like to try a bite of that? I don't think so. That's how they would preserve their wedding cake back then. They would put it in sugar, seal it in a jar, and it would keep it. And it's preserved it pretty well, as you can see. The wedding dresses were quite unique for that time period. We have a wonderful display, and at that particular time in El Reno was the county seat like it is today, and it got to be known as the wedding town. In the early 1900s, schools were so important in El Reno, like they are today and everywhere else. El Reno had a wonderful education department, and we have a wonderful display of our school in El Reno. Down to we would have a skating team, football, basketball, you name it. They started out with sports early on. We have a wonderful picture assortment. Also down to early on boomers, back to from the 1917. Even the old ink wells that were on the tables when they used to have to dip their pen in ink and use a quill pen and keep it sharp. Quill pen mean writing with a feather. Look at the size of this longhorn steer. Now you can get some idea of why the longhorn steer was the steer that they used along the Chisholm Trail. The size, the stability of the animal, and look at those horns. This steer survived all this time on the trails. Look at the size of those horns. You know what they would do? If you tried to fence them in, they would take those horns, lock them in a barbed wire fence, and then shake their head as hard as they could, and it would rip the fence out immediately, and they were free. So that's one reason why they were the steer that was used along the Chisholm Trail. The Chisholm Trail was very important in our community. We have the full map, of course, of the Chisholm Trail, which ran right through here along Fort Reno, Darlington, all along the Canadian River. Had a lot of fresh water to drink. Those wagons could come across, and they could herd those longhorns all the way to Texas or wherever they were heading, all along the Chisholm Trail.